Welcome to Semiconductor News Decoded. I'm Ty, with 31 years inside the semiconductor industry, bringing you the real view from the factory floor. Today's topic: Taiwan authorities have arrested suspects accused of illegally re-exporting high-performance AI servers built around NVIDIA's flagship AI chips from Taiwan to Hong Kong. We'll dig into what actually happened and what it tells us about how export controls really work in the AI era. As always, I'll explain everything in the most simplified way possible. Even a middle schooler should be able to follow along. If you're a specialist watching, some parts may feel oversimplified, but I'd like to prioritize giving everyone the big picture first. Think of today's story as an ultra-high-end piece of commercial kitchen equipment, so powerful that nations only let it be sold to a handful of pre-approved restaurants that ended up being smuggled, on paper, as a shipment to a famous ramen shop in Japan, through a third-country port and into an underground restaurant in a banned region. So, sit back and enjoy. Here's today's news, in one picture. We'll lean on this commercial kitchen analogy all the way through the opening section. Imagine an ultra-high-performance piece of commercial kitchen equipment. Only a handful of professional kitchens in the entire world even own one. Its heat output and speed are on a completely different level, and a single unit can produce dozens of times more food at once than a regular kitchen. Because it's so powerful, the government has decided this machine can only be sold to specific, licensed restaurants that have been approved. But here's what happened. The dealer filed paperwork saying, "We're selling this to a ramen shop in Japan." And in reality, they routed it through a warehouse in another country and quietly handed it off to an unlicensed restaurant operating underground in a banned area. That's the scheme that Taiwan's criminal investigators just shut down. So why is this kitchen equipment so tightly controlled in the first place? The reason is simple. Its performance is so high that it can be diverted to uses far beyond just making food. If you redirect that ultra-high heat output, you could imagine it being used to power combat drones or to run the control systems at a plant that produces explosives. So the government's reasoning is, they say it's for cooking, but maybe they actually plan to use it for something else. They set up a system where the machine can only be sold after a proper screening, and only to restaurants the government trusts. What does the actual rulebook look like? First, the dealer selling the equipment has to file with the government to whom, when, and how many units they're selling, and obtain a permit number. The restaurant buying it has to submit proof in advance that they hold a legitimate operating license. On top of that, they sign written pledges promising not to take the equipment outside the permitted area and not to resell it. The paperwork alone runs to many pages, and the procedure is genuinely cumbersome. That's the system designed to make sure these machines only end up with real chefs at real restaurants. What this dealer did was a head-on violation of that whole system. Here's the trick. On paper, the filing says we're selling 50 units to a famous ramen shop in Japan, and the shipment clears customs openly. The container goes on a ship at the Taiwan port, with the destination clearly written as Japan. On paper, it looks like a completely ordinary export deal. Nothing flagged, nothing suspicious. The reality, however, was completely different. The moment the ship arrives at an intermediate port, rather than at Japan itself, the cargo gets quietly transferred onto a different vessel, and the destination changes entirely. Where the cargo actually ended up was an underground restaurant in a region where these sales are forbidden. The kitchen equipment that was supposed to be going to a Japanese ramen shop on paper was actually lined up in the kitchen of an unlicensed restaurant in a completely different country, with no one even knowing who the real customer was. Each unit costs around 50 million yen, roughly 300,000 US dollars, and there were 50 units. That's over 2.5 billion yen in total. And reports say several units had already arrived and started operating in that underground kitchen. The next thing you wonder is, how on earth did the authorities catch this? In truth, the investigators very likely had this dealer in their crosshairs for a long time before the raid. In this operation, Taiwanese investigators hit 12 separate locations simultaneously. Offices, warehouses, the suspects' homes, even the shipping company. All the connected sites taken in one coordinated sweep. That's not something you can pull off by reacting to a scene as it unfolds. You can only execute that kind of operation if you've been running surveillance, watching movements, and analyzing communications records for months. In other words, the authorities had it all on tape, from the inside. And that's the key point of this case. So let me put the picture together. A piece of specialized kitchen equipment that the world agreed must never be handed over without a permit. A dealer used fake paperwork to march it through customs openly, transferred it at a third country port, and shuttled it into an underground restaurant where it should never have ended up. Of the more than 2.5 billion yen worth shipped, some units were already running inside that kitchen by the time the raid happened. Yet the investigators had been letting it play out, quietly watching, until they could move on all 12 sites at once. Swap the kitchen equipment for semiconductors, swap the underground restaurant for a sanctioned country, and today's news lines up almost 1-to-1. From here, let me walk you through what this actually looks like in the real semiconductor industry. The item at the center of this case is an AI server built by Supermicro and packed with NVIDIA's most advanced AI accelerators. NVIDIA, as most of you already know, designs and produces the leading-edge AI chips themselves. Supermicro, a major Taiwan-affiliated server maker, packs those chips at high density into industrial-grade server chassis. That combination is currently one of the most fought-over pieces of hardware in the world, scooped up by AI data centers everywhere. So why is this kind of AI server under such tight export controls? The reason is clear. The computational capability of these AI chips raises serious concerns about military use cases that extend well beyond civilian applications. Concretely, they could be used for military image analysis, autonomous weapon control systems, code breaking, large-scale simulation, and more. The US government has been increasingly worried that letting these leading-edge AI chips flow freely could end up strengthening Chinese military capabilities. And in recent years, US export controls on these chips have tightened sharply. The legal foundation for those export controls is a set of rules called EAR. EAR stands for the Export Administration Regulations, administered by the Bureau of Industry and Security under the US Department of Commerce. It covers not just products made in the United States, it also reaches products assembled in other countries, as long as they contain US origin technology or parts above a certain threshold. The AI servers seized in this case carry NVIDIA chips made in the United States, so they fall squarely under EAR coverage. Within EAR, the most important piece is a classification number called the ECCN. ECCN stands for Export Control Classification Number, a detailed code assigned to each individual item being exported. Even within AI chips, different ECCNs are assigned depending on computational performance and memory bandwidth, and the strength of the restriction changes accordingly. What ECCN did the equipment in this case actually fall under, and who was the real end customer? Those are the two questions that sit right at the heart of this investigation. Under the rules, the dealer should have filed and obtained permits based on the proper ECCN classification. The other essential concept in export controls is the end user. In export controls, who the goods are formally addressed to on paper matters less than who actually uses the goods at the end of the line, and for what purpose. In this case, the paperwork named buyers in Northeast Asia, Japan or South Korea, as the destination. But the actual end user, after going through Hong Kong and one more hop beyond, was very likely someone connected to mainland China. This pattern, paperwork showing one destination but the real end customer being somewhere else entirely, is well known in the export control world as a classic diversion shipment. The flow goes like this. First, the paperwork names a destination in a country with lenient export controls, and the shipment clears customs legally. Then, once it lands, the cargo gets transferred onto a different shipping route and routed onward to the actual destination, the sanctioned country. By passing the cargo through multiple trading firms and shipping companies along the way, the paper trail gets deliberately blurred. What stands out about this case is the 12 simultaneous searches conducted by Taiwanese investigators. To hit 12 sites in parallel, you have to know in advance what's at each site, who's involved, and how everything connects. That requires weeks or months of long-running surveillance. On the ground, securing electronic data, detaining individuals, and seizing physical evidence all had to happen at the same time. My read is that there was a long pre-investigation phase behind this, and that's how the simultaneous raid was possible. Another question worth asking: what did the Chinese side actually intend to do with these servers? My personal read is that it was likely about use, not analysis, meaning they weren't planning to disassemble the servers and steal the underlying technology. They wanted to actually run these AI servers and put them to work on their own AI development and large-scale training. That suggests that China is still unable to produce the most advanced AI chips domestically, and so securing the physical hardware itself has become the higher priority goal. This case isn't just an isolated incident of one company breaking export rules. It's a defining moment for export control in the AI era. Managing the supply of AI chips is on a completely different scale and difficulty level than ordinary electronic parts export control. The price per unit is extremely high, the volumes shipped aren't large, and the buyers are limited to a small set of data center operators. Even so, diversion shipments are still happening. That's how brutal the demand is for cutting-edge AI silicon and how high the prices have climbed. After this bust, export controls in the US, Taiwan, Japan, and other allied countries are almost certainly going to tighten one more notch. From a Japanese company perspective, this case is absolutely not someone else's problem. Japan also falls under the extraterritorial reach of EAR. Any product assembled inside Japan that incorporates NVIDIA chips or similar US origin components has to be handled with that same level of care if it gets re-exported. On top of that, when Japanese companies deal in AI servers for data centers, they have to verify the true location of the end customer, the intended use, and even the countries where affiliated entities operate. Without that, you can end up unknowingly helping with an illegal export. Internal export control processes, ECCN classification checks, and end customer verification, all of these will need to be strengthened further from here on. Now for my own view. This case is a sharp reminder of just how strategically important AI chips have become in the geopolitical arena. I myself dealt with semiconductor export controls in the past. At peak, we'd handle several dozen cases a year. But back then, the focus was specialty military chips. General-purpose components rarely came up. Now, NVIDIA's general-purpose AI accelerators are sitting at the very center of state-to-state maneuvering. That shows you how completely the landscape of this industry has changed. And one more thing I want to emphasize. If you go down the path of diversion shipments, you will get caught eventually. The 12-location simultaneous raid speaks to how serious the Taiwanese authorities are, and the investigative cooperation between allied governments is clearly tightening. Lending a hand illegally for a short-term gain destroys a company's credibility in an instant. Speaking for myself, every time I handle anything related to this area, I want to keep that lesson fresh. That's all for today. I'll keep bringing you semiconductor news and analysis, so if you found this useful, please like, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video. This has been Ty on Semiconductor News Decoded.